The evening started like any other for the young waitress who worked long hours at the busy restaurant on the corner of the street. She moved quickly from table to table, taking orders, balancing trays, trying her best to keep up with the Friday night crowd. Her uniform was slightly worn from countless shifts, and her hair was tied back in a neat bun that had slowly loosened as the night went on. She was tired, but she pushed through it like she always did. She needed the job, and she needed the money. She had learned long ago that life rarely gave her easy days. But what most people in the restaurant didn't know was that hidden behind her calm voice and polite smile was a story that had once been filled with music. Before the hardships, before the bills, before the long hours of serving customers who forgot her face as soon as they left, she had lived a very different life. She had grown up around a piano. It used to be the one place where she felt like she belonged. But that part of her life had faded away. Pushed aside by responsibilities she never asked for, the restaurant was dimly lit, with soft lights hanging from the ceiling. People chatted loudly, forks clicked against plates, and the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the air. The young waitress knew every inch of the place, including the dusty upright piano in the corner. No one played it anymore. It was mostly there for decoration, an old piece the owner had bought at a sale just to make the place look fancy. Sometimes she would glance at the piano while passing by, feeling a small sting in her chest, remembering what used to be. But she never touched it. Not once. It was almost the end of her shift when the restaurant door opened and a group of well-dressed people walked in. They looked important, or at least they wanted everyone to think so. Leading them was a man who carried himself like he owned everything in his path. His clothes were expensive, his watch flashed under the lights, and he spoke with the kind of confidence that came only from someone who had never struggled for anything. The manager rushed over quickly, welcoming them with a big smile. The young waitress watched from the side, knowing right away the group would be placed in her section. She hoped they would be easy customers, the kind who were too busy talking to bother her. She needed the night to end peacefully, but when she approached their table, the man in the expensive suit looked her up and down with a half-smile that made her feel strangely uncomfortable. He wasn't rude exactly, but something in his eyes told her he saw her as less than him, like she was there purely for his entertainment. She took their orders politely while they joked among themselves, their conversation loud and careless. As she turned to leave, one of the man's friends looked toward the piano in the corner. "Does anyone even use that thing?" he asked. The man in the suit leaned back in his chair. "Probably not. I doubt anyone here knows how to play." Before she could stop herself, the young waitress glanced at the piano. It wasn't much of a reaction, but it was enough for the man to notice. "You know how to play?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She froze for a moment. "I used to," she said softly, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Used to?" he repeated with a grin. "Come on then, play something for us." Her heart skipped. She didn't want attention. She didn't want to perform in front of strangers. And she definitely didn't want to be put on the spot by someone who thought he could command anyone he wanted. "I'm working right now," she said gently. "I should finish serving your table," he waved dismissively. "It'll take 5 minutes. We're not in a hurry." His tone wasn't threatening, but it carried the kind of pressure that made it clear he expected her to listen. She glanced toward her manager, hoping he would step in, but instead he gave her a helpless look, as if saying it was better not to upset the wealthy guests. She understood immediately. Money talked, and people like her were expected to stay quiet. Inside, she felt a mix of embarrassment and frustration. She didn't like being pushed. She didn't like being treated like some sort of showpiece. But at the same time, she couldn't afford to anger her manager or risk her job. The man leaned forward again. "Unless you were lying about knowing how to play," he said casually. That stung. She wasn't a liar. She had never lied about her abilities. She simply didn't use them anymore. But now, she felt cornered, like she was being forced to defend herself. "I'm not lying," she said quietly. "Then play," he said with a shrug. As if it was the simplest thing in the world, she swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She looked toward the piano again. Dust clung to its surface, and the keys were probably out of tune. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Her fingers were stiff now, the muscles no longer trained like they once were. She was scared of messing up, scared of embarrassing herself, but the whole restaurant was watching now. Conversations slowed as people noticed the situation. A few diners whispered to each other, curious to see what would happen. It felt like the pressure of the entire room was slowly settling on her shoulders. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered, though her voice shook. The man smiled like he had just won some sort of game. His friends leaned back in their chairs, ready to be entertained. She walked slowly toward the piano, her footsteps soft on the floor. Her hands trembled slightly, and she kept her eyes down to avoid the stares. She felt exposed, as if every light in the room had turned directly on her. When she reached the piano, she paused. She ran her hand across the dusty top, feeling the rough layer of neglect. She sat down gently, taking a deep breath. The wooden bench creaked under her weight. Her fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain. She pressed one softly. It made a dull sound, flat and out of tune. Instantly, her anxiety grew. She remembered how she used to play effortlessly, how music once flowed from her like second nature. Now she felt like a stranger to the instrument. She closed her eyes for a moment and tried to gather her thoughts. She remembered sitting at her old piano at home, practicing late into the night. She remembered the warmth she felt whenever she played. It was the only place where things made sense. But life had taken her away from that world. And now she feared she would make a fool of herself. The restaurant grew quieter. Even the clinking of utensils stopped. People were waiting. She took one more breath and placed both hands on the keys. She didn't know if she would remember the piece fully, or if her fingers would obey her. She only knew that she had no choice but to try, and so, with her heart beating fast and her nerves trembling beneath her skin, she began to play. The first notes were soft and uncertain, like someone trying to remember a language they hadn't spoken in years. But in that moment, as the sound drifted through the room, something inside her stirred, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't know what the night would bring, or how the audience would react. All she knew was that the music, even broken and rusty, was still a part of her, and this was only the beginning of a moment she never expected to face again. The first few notes slipped from her fingers like tiny whispers, soft and unsure. She felt as if every person in the restaurant was judging her, waiting for her to fail. Her heart thumped so loudly inside her chest that she thought everyone could hear it. She kept her eyes fixed on the keys, afraid to look anywhere else. The last thing she wanted was to see the rich man's amused smile while she struggled. Her hands trembled slightly. She missed a note. It wasn't a loud mistake, but she heard it as if the key had screamed at her. Heat rushed to her cheeks, and she thought about stopping. She thought about standing up and walking away. But then she remembered the look on his face when he asked if she had been lying. She hated that look. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of thinking she had bragged about something she couldn't do, so she kept going. Her fingers dug into her memory, searching for the tune she used to know by heart. It had been a song she played during quieter days. A piece she would practice late at night when she still believed music could shape her future. She wasn't sure she remembered all of it, but her hands slowly pieced it together. One note at a time, the sound floated through the restaurant, shaky but gentle. A few people leaned back in their chairs, surprised that she could play at all. Others turned their heads slightly, listening. She felt their eyes on her, but she forced herself to block them out. All she wanted was to remember the next part of the song. As the melody began to connect, she felt something loosen inside her. It was as if her body remembered the movement even when her mind didn't. Muscle memory, her old piano teacher used to call it. Her fingers knew the path, even if they weren't as strong or fast as they once were. Still, every second felt like a battle. A battle against fear. A battle against the weight of the past. A battle against the pressure of being forced into the spotlight when she least expected it. She tried to breathe normally, but her breaths came short and shallow. The piano keys felt stiff under her touch, and some notes sounded flat. But she didn't stop. She kept playing because stopping felt like stepping backward into a life she was trying to escape from. Slowly, little by little, the music began to steady. Her hands followed the rising and falling rhythm she used to love. As the notes spread through the air, something unexpected happened. the restaurant began to grow quieter. The conversations faded. The sound of clinking plates softened. Even the kitchen noise felt distant now. People were listening. She didn't know if they liked it. She didn't know if they were judging her or if they were simply curious. But at least they were quiet, and the silence gave her space to breathe. With that small comfort, she let her fingers relax. They moved a bit more naturally now, slipping from one key to another. She felt the edge of her fear soften. Just a little. She reached the middle part of the song, one of the parts she always used to struggle with. It required smooth transitions between keys, and she had once spent hours practicing it. Her fingers hesitated again, unsure of what came next. She paused for half a second, hoping no one noticed. But from the corner of her eye, she saw a few people watching closely. Her stomach twisted. She forced her mind to focus. She played the next few notes carefully, hoping they were the right ones. They didn't sound perfect, but they weren't wrong either. Relief washed over her, and she let her shoulders relax slightly. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to look up. Her eyes met the faces of some of the diners. Most had soft expressions, surprised, curious, maybe a little impressed. A few smiled gently. They didn't seem to be judging her the way she feared. Then she saw him, the rich man. He wasn't smirking anymore. He wasn't leaning back casually or laughing with his friends. Instead, he was staring at her with a puzzled look, like he wasn't sure how to react. It wasn't admiration, but it wasn't mockery either. It was something in between. Something she hadn't seen from him before. She looked away quickly, not wanting to think about him. She didn't want her performance to be for him. She didn't want to care about his opinion. She wanted the music to be hers again, even if only for a moment. She focused on the keys and the sound they made. The restaurant continued to stay quiet, and even the manager stood near the bar, watching her with a mix of surprise and guilt as she played. Memories began to surface, memories she had tried to bury for years. She remembered her old room at home, the one with the small window where sunlight would fall across the piano. She remembered her mother sitting beside her, encouraging her with every lesson. She remembered how proud she used to feel when she finished a piece, without mistakes. But she also remembered the day everything changed. The day she had to leave her practice behind, the day responsibilities took over. Bills, work. Stress life had pushed her away from music until she could barely remember the last time she touched a piano. Now, with each note she played in the restaurant, she felt those memories stirring again. They didn't hurt as much as they once did. Instead, they felt like tiny reminders of a life she once loved. She kept playing, letting the melody speak for her. The song felt different now, soft, emotional, almost fragile. She wasn't playing it perfectly, but she was playing it honestly. Every note carried a piece of her story. Then came a part she feared the most. The song moved into a section requiring her right hand to stretch and shift quickly. It had always been the hardest part for her. And now, with years of no practice, she knew the risk of messing up was high. She took a slow breath. Her fingers moved carefully, stretching across the keys. She hit one note too hard, making it sound sharp, but she didn't stop. She kept moving, determined to finish. Her hands shook slightly, but they didn't fail her. Somehow, she made it through the difficult section. It wasn't smooth, and it wasn't perfect, but it was enough. She felt a small swell of pride inside her chest. Not because she was amazing, but because she didn't give up. The song gradually softened as it reached the ending part. This section was easier, simple, slow, almost like a quiet goodbye. Her fingers moved gently, letting the final notes settle into the air like falling petals. When she played the last note, the sound lingered for a moment. Then the restaurant went completely silent. She sat still, her hands resting on the keys, afraid to look up. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like she had given a piece of herself to a room full of strangers. Her chest rose and fell quickly as she tried to calm her breathing. She waited for someone to laugh. She waited for someone to criticize. She waited for the rich man to make some careless remark, but no one said anything. She finally lifted her head. People were staring at her, but not with judgment. Their expressions were soft, thoughtful, almost touched. A few customers nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the effort she had put into playing. Her hands trembled again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. Then she looked at the rich man. His face had changed completely. The smug confidence was gone. Now he looked stunned, confused by the fact that the waitress he had, pressured into performing, had actually played something meaningful. He didn't clap. He didn't speak. He just stared at her quietly, as if he didn't know what to do with the feeling rising inside him. His friends glanced at him, waiting for him to comment. But he said nothing. The young waitress slowly stood up from the bench, her knees slightly weak. She gave a small nod, not knowing what else to do, and walked away from the piano. Her steps were light, shaky, and a little uneven. But there was something new in her movement, a soft, hidden strength she hadn't felt in a long time. She returned to her work quietly, unsure of what would happen next. But one thing was clear, this night had changed something. Inside the restaurant, inside the man who had doubted her, and most importantly inside herself. She didn't know how the rest of the night would unfold. But deep inside her heart, something that had been silent for years was starting to wake up again, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what that meant, but she knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. When she walked away from the piano, her heart was still pounding. She tried to return to her work as if nothing had happened, but everything around her felt different now. The usual noise of the restaurant slowly returned, but it no longer felt the same. People were still watching her, some with small smiles, others with quiet admiration. She avoided their eyes as best as she could. She went back to the counter to pick up an order, hoping the familiar routine would calm her nerves. Her hands were still shaking, so she gripped the tray tightly, steadying herself with slow breaths. The manager approached her with a look she hadn't seen from him before. He wasn't scolding her or rushing her. Instead, he looked almost embarrassed, as if he knew he should have stood up for her earlier. "You did well?" he whispered quietly. She nodded, unsure how to respond. She didn't want praise. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to get through her shift and go home. But the night wasn't done with her yet. When she walked back to the table of the rich man and his friends, she felt the tension rising inside her again. She wasn't afraid of them anymore, but she didn't know what to expect. Their faces were unreadable. Not mocking, not amused, just confused and surprised. The man who had pressured her into playing watched her closely. His posture had changed. He no longer leaned back in a relaxed manner. His elbows were on the table, his hands clasped, and his eyes followed her every move. She placed their food on the table and stepped back. She waited for him to say something, to make some comment, to turn everything into a joke. But he didn't. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked quietly, almost gently. She looked at him, unsure if he was being sincere or just curious. "I learned when I was younger," she replied in a soft tone. "You're really good," he said, sounding like he was struggling to find words. She didn't know how to react. She muttered a simple thank you and stepped away quickly. Not wanting to stand at the table any longer, as she walked away, she heard his friends whispering to each other. "She's better than I expected. I didn't think she'd actually play. That was impressive." Their voices faded as she moved farther from the table, but the words clung to her memory. She didn't know whether to feel proud or uneasy. She continued working, delivering plates, refilling drinks, and cleaning empty tables. But her mind kept drifting back to the piano. The feeling she had while playing wouldn't leave her. It wasn't just the fear or the pressure, it was something else. Something that made her chest feel warm. It reminded her of who she used to be. For years, she had convinced herself that music was a dream that belonged to her childhood, a dream she could no longer afford. But tonight had reminded her that the dream wasn't completely gone. It was buried, yes, but still alive. The thought scared her. Dreams were complicated things. They could bring hope, but they could also bring disappointment. And she had experienced enough disappointment in her life. She wasn't sure she had the strength to go through it again. Later that night, while she was wiping down a table near the window, she felt someone approach. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The rich man's presence carried a certain weight. "Can we talk for a minute?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded politely. She didn't want trouble. She also didn't want to appear rude. He stood on the other side of the table, his hands in his pockets. His expression was different now. Not proud or arrogant. Something quieter, maybe even thoughtful. "I didn't expect you to play like that," he admitted. I don't know. I thought you were just saying it." She looked at him calmly. "I wasn't trying to impress anyone," she said. "I just played because you asked." He nodded slowly. "I know. And I shouldn't have pressured you like that." The word surprised her. An apology from him was the last thing she expected. He looked down for a second, almost embarrassed. "I'm used to people doing what I ask. I didn't think about how it might feel for you." She didn't know what to say. She wasn't angry anymore, but the memory of being put on the spot still stung a little. "It's okay," she said softly. "I played. It's done." "Ack!" But he shook his head. "No, it's not okay. You shouldn't have been made to do something you weren't comfortable with." She stared at him, unsure if he was saying this because he meant it or because he felt guilty. She didn't want him to think she was fragile. She had been through much worse than being asked to play a piano. "You played beautifully," he added. "You know that, right?" She looked down at the cloth she was holding. "I haven't played in a long time, but you should. You have talent." She let out a tiny breath, unsure whether it was amusement or disbelief. Talent. That word felt strange to her now, like it belonged to someone she used to be. Before she could reply, a customer called her name from across the room, and she excused herself quickly. Relieved to end the conversation, the rest of the night passed slowly, but the atmosphere had shifted. People treated her a little differently now. Some smiled at her when she walked by. Others whispered compliments. One older couple even stopped her to say they hadn't heard such heartfelt playing in years. It felt nice. It felt strange. It felt like someone had opened a window inside her that had been closed for too long, when the restaurant finally began to empty. She helped stack the chairs and sweep the floor. Her shift was almost over. She felt exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. The night had been heavier than she expected. Before she left, she walked past the piano one more time. She paused beside it, placing her hand lightly on the wooden surface. The dust still clung to it. But underneath the dust was something she had forgotten, something familiar. She pressed one key. Just one. It made a soft, lonely sound. She didn't play anything else. She wasn't ready to face whatever feelings the instrument stirred. But the touch of the key lingered with her even as she walked away. Outside, the night air was cool. The street was quiet except for a few cars passing by. She wrapped her arms around herself, thinking about the piano again. Thinking about the rich man's apology, thinking about the way people looked at her when she played. She didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't know if the piano was meant to be part of her life again, or if tonight was just a strange moment that would fade with time. But she couldn't deny the truth, for the first time in years. She felt something awaken inside her, something she thought she had lost, and she wasn't sure whether it scared her or gave her hope. As she walked home, her thoughts drifted back to the song she had played. Her fingers twitched slightly, almost remembering the movement. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe the music still belonged to her. She didn't have answers yet. But she knew one thing for sure. Something had changed. And the night that started as just another shift had turned into something she would remember for the rest of her life. She woke up earlier than usual that morning. Long before the sun had risen, her room was quiet, and for a moment she lay still, staring at the faint shape of the piano sheet she had left on the small table beside her bed. She had barely slept, but her mind felt strangely awake. If the worry sitting in her chest had kept her alert all night, she knew this day would bring another challenge. The night before had ended in a way she would never forget. The wealthy man's demand, his sharp stare, the pressure of everyone watching, and then the surprising silence that followed her performance. She had not expected him to react that way. No one had. Something had changed in his expression. Something she couldn't quite explain as she got ready for work. She moved slowly, replaying every moment from the previous day. She wondered if she would see him again. A part of her hoped he would not return, but another part, the small brave corner of her heart, wanted answers. When she reached the cafe, the doors were still locked. The morning air was cold, brushing against her skin as she fumbled with the keys. Inside, the smell of coffee beans and baked bread wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She wiped the tables, set the chairs, and arranged the counter. Routine helped her breathe, but her mind did not calm. It kept circling the same thought. Why had he looked stunned? He was used to everything: money, control, attention. He did not seem like someone who could be moved by music. Yet something in her playing had reached him. She did not understand it, but she felt it. By the time the cafe opened, a few customers had already lined up outside. She gave them warm smiles, preparing their usual orders, letting the noise of the morning distract her. She thought maybe the entire situation would fade. Maybe it had all been a strange moment that would pass quietly. But the day had other plans. It was almost noon when a coworker touched her arm and whispered, "He's here." Her heart dropped. She turned slowly, and there he was, the same rich man standing at the entrance in a dark coat, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. This time, he did not look angry. He looked different. Thoughtful, almost unsure. He walked toward the counter, stopping in front of her. "I need to speak with you," he said quietly. His voice was low, but there was a tone she hadn't heard from him before. A small tremble, as if he wasn't completely steady. She swallowed. "I'm working right now. I won't take long," he replied. She hesitated, then nodded toward the side hallway. They stepped away from the crowd, standing near the door where staff usually entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She crossed her arms, not out of anger, but out of fear and confusion. Finally, he spoke. "About yesterday. I owe you an apology from him." She almost didn't believe it. He continued. "I was rude. I acted like I had the right to demand something from you. I didn't, and yet you played." She didn't respond, unsure what to say. His eyes lowered for a second. "Your performance. It reminded me of someone." The room felt suddenly heavier. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Someone I lost years ago." She felt her breath catch. The emotion in his voice was in the moment she touched the last note. The room stayed still, as if the sound was still floating in the air. No one moved. No one whispered. Even the soft clatter of plates from the kitchen had stopped. It felt like the whole restaurant had paused for one long breath. Not sure how to return to normal after what they had just witnessed. She sat there for a few seconds, her fingertips resting lightly on the keys. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as if she had run a long distance. She did not dare look up. She was afraid she had let something slip, that she had shown too much of herself in front of strangers. She had not planned to play like that. She had not planned to open that part of her heart again. But once her hands found the rhythm, the memories came with it. And the music carried her further than she expected. Then the applause hit. It started with one pair of hands. Then another. Then a few more. Within seconds, the entire room was clapping loudly, some people even standing. Their faces were bright, surprised, moved in a way she could not fully understand. She blinked fast, startled by the sudden wave of sound. She finally lifted her head. The rich man who had been sitting with that smug smile earlier was not smiling anymore. He looked shocked, almost embarrassed, like someone who just realized he had misjudged a person in the worst way. His friends stared at him, then at her, whispering among themselves. One of them even gave a small nod toward her, as if to say she had earned something greater than applause. Her manager stood near the counter, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. For a moment, he did not even clap. He seemed frozen, unsure whether to be proud, guilty, or amazed. When he finally brought his hands together, he did it slowly, almost shyly, as if he felt he owed her an apology. He was too afraid to say aloud. She looked down again, trying to calm her breathing. The applause kept going, turning into cheers and whistles. Someone called out, "Encore." Someone else asked for her name. She shook her head gently, not ready for any of it. The rich man finally rose from his seat. His movements were stiff, almost uncomfortable, like he had suddenly become aware of how many people were watching him. He walked toward her with steady steps, but his eyes revealed uncertainty. As he reached the edge of the stage area, he paused. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. It was clear he wanted to say something, but the words were stuck. She stood up slowly, feeling a strange mix of pride and worry. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. Something had changed in the room. The power he had earlier, the kind that came from money and attitude, seemed to fade in front of everyone. Finally, he managed a few words. "I didn't expect that." They weren't the apologies she may have deserved, but they were enough to show that his arrogance had cracked. His voice lacked the confidence he had earlier. He looked down, then looked back at her, as if trying to understand how someone he thought so little of could play with such emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. Even though she wasn't sure what she was thanking him for, maybe for giving her the push she never wanted but secretly needed. Maybe for being the reason she returned to the piano after so long. She didn't know yet. He stepped aside awkwardly, allowing others to come forward. A few customers approached her to praise her performance. One couple said they had never heard something so beautiful in a restaurant before. A man said she sounded like someone trained in a top academy. Someone else asked if she had recordings online. She shook her head each time, smiling politely but feeling overwhelmed. As she tried to step away from the piano, her manager rushed toward her. For the first time since she had known him, he looked nervous in a sincere way. "Really sorry," he whispered, voice shaky. "I shouldn't have let him pressure you like that. I didn't want trouble with him. But I was wrong." She nodded gently. She could see he meant it. "It's okay." He shook his head again. "No, it's not. But thank you. And you were incredible." Hearing those words from him made her chest warm. She'd never expected him to say something like that, especially not with such honesty. She could tell that even he had been moved by her playing as she walked away from the piano. More customers approached her. Some wanted to shake her hand. Some wanted to compliment her. A few even asked if she gave lessons. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, and for a moment, she felt like she was living someone else's life. Then the man from earlier, the one who had watched her from a distance, with an unusually thoughtful expression, stepped closer. He was not part of the rich man's group. He carried himself differently, calm and observant. When he reached her, he offered a warm smile. "I work with a music academy," he said gently. "I don't want to pressure you, but you have something rare. You don't just play notes. You play feelings." Her heart skipped. She stared at him, unsure what to say. He continued, "If you ever think about returning to music, even in a small way, we would be honored to hear you again. No obligation. No pressure. Just an opportunity if you want it." The words settled in her mind like a soft whisper of hope. She didn't answer right away, but the idea warmed her, filling her chest with something she hadn't felt in years. The rich man, still standing awkwardly near his table, glanced toward the academy man. His expression shifted against something between surprise and regret. It was clear that he now understood the impact of his careless demand. What he thought would be a moment of mockery had turned into a moment of transformation. The evening moved on. The energy in the room remained different. People kept looking at her with admiration, their eyes telling her more than words. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and excitement, like someone who had taken a big leap without planning to, as she finally returned to the staff area to catch her breath. She placed her hand over her chest. Her heartbeat was still quick, but not from fear. It was from the thrill of remembering who she once was, and who she might be again. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the applause echo in her mind one last time. She knew something had shifted inside her forever. What had started as an uncomfortable moment in front of a demanding customer had become a turning point. She didn't know where it would lead yet, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to find out. When the restaurant finally began to quiet down and people slowly returned to their meals, she slipped into the back hallway for a moment of air. Her hands were still trembling, but not from fear this time. It felt like a strange excitement running through her veins. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and took a slow breath. Trying to understand everything that had just happened, she had not planned any of this. She had only come to work like any other day. She had expected nothing more than the usual shift filled with tired footsteps, simple greetings, and the routine of carrying trays. But life had taken a sharp turn without warning, And now she felt as though a door she once closed had been pushed open again. As she stood there, she heard soft footsteps approaching. She straightened up, expecting maybe her manager or another server. Instead, it was the man from the music academy, walking with calm and steady steps. "Are you all right?" he asked in a gentle voice. She nodded. "I'm just trying to understand everything," smiled kindly. "You don't have to decide anything today. I just wanted you to know that the offer is real. If you ever feel ready, even months from now, you are welcome to come." She lowered her eyes, thinking about the years she had spent avoiding pianos, avoiding memories, avoiding the hurt that came with letting go of something she loved. "I stopped playing because things got hard," she said quietly. "Life didn't give me much space to chase dreams." He didn't interrupt. He waited patiently, allowing her to speak at her own pace, and now she hesitated. "Now I'm not sure if I can start again." "You don't need to start big," he replied softly. "Sometimes the smallest steps change everything." His words settled in her mind like warm light. She gave a tiny nod, appreciating his honesty. He didn't promise miracles. He didn't pressure her. He simply offered a path she had thought was gone forever. After he left, she remained in the hallway for a few more minutes. Her heart slowly returned to a calmer rhythm. She wiped her palms on her apron, took a deep breath, and walked back out to finish her shift. When she returned to the main floor, the rich man was still there, sitting stiffly at his table. His friends had already left, and he seemed smaller, somehow not in size, but in the way he carried himself. When he saw her approaching, he stood up quickly, as if preparing himself. For a moment, they just stared at each other. He seemed to search for the right words, his jaw tightening nervously. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, his voice low and sincere. "I shouldn't have pushed you the way I did. I thought." He stopped, then shook his head. "I thought you were pretending. I was wrong. Very wrong." She looked at him quietly. She hadn't expected an apology from him, and it surprised her more than his earlier behavior. "It's all right," she said after a moment. "Maybe it happened for a reason." He let out a slow breath, as if relieved she didn't yell or turn away. "You're talented," he added softly. "Really talented. I didn't expect to feel anything from a performance. But you played with your heart." She nodded. She could see the honesty in his eyes. His arrogance from earlier had faded, replaced by something else, something almost humble. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "This is not for anything fancy," he said quickly, noticing the way she looked at it. "Just if you ever need help with something, anything outside this place, call me. Not because I pity you, but because I respect you now." She accepted the card not because she needed it, but because she could tell the gesture came from genuine remorse after he left. She slipped the card into her apron pocket and returned to her duties. For the rest of the night, customers greeted her with warm smiles. A few whispered compliments as she passed by. A woman even told her that she had made the whole evening unforgettable. By the time she clocked out, the exhaustion from the long shift mixed with an indescribable feeling inside her something like hope, something like a new beginning. Outside, the cool night air brushed her face gently. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked up at the sky. The stars seemed brighter than usual, not because anything had changed in the world, because something had changed inside her. On her way home, she kept thinking about the piano, the weight of the keys, the music she had hidden for so long, the feeling of being alive again, even if just for a few minutes. When she reached her small apartment, she placed her apron on the chair and sat at the edge of her bed. She closed her eyes and let the memory of the performance wash over her. The sound of applause echoed faintly in her mind. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I can try again." The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. A soft, excited energy filled her chest. Instead of scrolling on her phone or rushing through her routine, she sat at her small table and looked at her hands. They still remembered every movement from last night after breakfast. She took a deep breath and opened an old box from under her bed. Inside was a worn music notebook, filled with pieces she had practiced years ago. Some pages were torn, some stained. But the sight of them brought a gentle smile to her face. She ran her finger along a familiar melody. It felt like greeting an old friend. Later that day, after finishing her shift, she walked through the city with slow steps, her thoughts full of courage she didn't know she still had. Without meaning to, her feet carried her toward a quiet building with large windows, the music academy. She stood outside for a while, unsure if she should go in. She wasn't dressed nicely. She hadn't prepared anything. She wasn't even sure she had the strength to face disappointment again. But then she remembered the feeling she had at the piano. The warmth in her chest, the way the room had gone silent, the way people listened. She took a breath, and she stepped inside. The same academy man from the restaurant looked up from the reception desk, surprised but happy. "I didn't expect you so soon," he said with a smile. "Want to try?" she said softly. His smile widened. "That's all you need." He led her to a small practice room with a polished piano waiting for her. She hesitated at the doorway. The room was warm and bright, and it smelled faintly of wood and old music sheets. When she sat in front of the piano, her heart pounded, but this time it wasn't fear, it was hope. She placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes, and let the music come. The first notes were soft, unsure. Then they grew stronger. Each note felt like another step forward, another piece of her, turning another part of her future taking shape. She didn't know where this path would lead. She didn't know if she would join the academy, perform again, or simply play for herself. But she knew one thing for certain. The music inside her had finally awakened, and she was ready to follow it wherever it would take her.